Welcome back to Fuller Speed Ahead. We pick back up with part 5 of our interview with my father, U.S. Express founder Max Fuller. Enjoy. Okay, so you're working for your father in the 1970s, sort of mid-1970, early 1970. Clyde has got this reputation of being a bit of a hellraiser. So we've talked about him gambling and drinking, but he also, in those days, was scrappy, sometimes trying to just make ends meet.
Well, when you don't have money and you're trying to build a business, then you got to do sometimes what sounds like ridiculous things.
So what was one of those things?
Well, like we'd have a truck come in from, say, a trip to California, but we'd have another truck that basically didn't have tires good enough to make the trip. And this is back when tires only lived maybe 50 or 60,000 miles at the most. But then we'd take tires off the truck that just came in, switch them over to the other truck.
So a truck had good tires, and you put the good tires on a truck to go across the country.
So I mean, you'd switch the tires because you didn't have the money to go buy additional tires.
So what happened to the truck with bad tires?
Well, we'd do maintenance and stuff on it, and then when another truck would come in, we'd rotate the tires there. So I mean, a lot of extra work just because you didn't have the money to do it.
How long did it take to take the tires off a truck?
Well, maybe 2 or 3 hours. I mean,
but it was better. It was better to spend that money.
Well, you didn't have the money, so you didn't have a choice.
You did whatever it took.
You basically figure out how to do things with very, very few dollars, even if you had to spend a lot more time doing it, extra work, but it made things happen.
It's total scrappy.
And I mean, it's changing tires on the truck. Well, there's even more stories similar to that. You'd have drivers come in and, they need their time off, but you'd put another driver on that truck and try to keep the thing rolling.
Slip seat them.
You'd basically do slip seats. And that was another thing that we did that basically helped the efficiency of having a high dollar asset that, couldn't sit.
Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, those things are smart operating. What were some of the more questionable things that Clyde did that were technically illegal?
Well, probably the most questionable thing was, back in the early 70s, Tennessee had a front and rear license plate for Class 8 tractor. None of our trucks had the rear license plate on it because it was on another truck. So
he would have 2 trucks going down the highway with the same license plate.
Right.
And what would he do? The ones on the rear just didn't have them?
They didn't have them.
So he would get 2 plates per truck and just said, screw it.
Right. I mean,
And was it the truck that had to have the license plate, or was it the trailer?
Well, the trailer has to have its own.
Okay, so it's different. So basically, if I'm looking at the truck from behind, I would never know that the license plate was missing because it wasn't a bobtail.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
So he just like, hey, I've got 2 trucks.
I got 2 license plates, let's use them.
Got it. Okay.
And you had to cut a lot of corners in order to be able to afford to build a business.
A lot of, doing whatever it took to build it.
That's the proper term, doing whatever it took. And sometimes it was a little bit illegal, and sometimes it's just totally illegal. Like
what was some of the crazy, other than the license plate, what was some of the other stuff he did?
Well, we had, there's almost so many things that we did.
Story I heard years ago was he got in trouble. Gosh, I think it was the ICC, and probably some of the stuff we talked about was he was doing stuff. Somehow he got called into a courtroom because of some ICC violation that he had done, and was in the court. And I guess he was really upset that he was on trial or something, and went outside on the court steps and took out because I remember Clyde used to carry a wad of cash with a money clip.
Right.
But he went outside and grabbed and basically handed a bunch of cash over to he basically was bribing the state official or the government official on the county court steps. Is that?
Yeah, he was constantly doing that, and back in those days, it was very common. If you
to pay off government officials?
Well, to pay off people to make things happen. I mean, if you go to other counther's, it still happens. But, you couldn't get by with that.
We call that corruption.
Well, but...
And illegal bribery.
Well, but, if the other person takes it, is it?
I mean, I don't. By definition,
I'm
by
just
law,
teasing
yeah.
you, but yeah.
I mean, by law, of course it is. But so he's bribing these people. Is that a true story or is that just a legend?
That's probably a true story, knowing my dad.
Okay.
I don't know the details, but I wouldn't put it past him.
Got it. Okay. So tell me some other stuff. So Clyde's got this business running in the 70s. And one of the things that I think you had told me at one time was he didn't like drawing a lot of attention to himself. And in other words, because he was sort of skirting the law, he wanted to keep a very low profile. And one of the things about trucks is you see them on the roads, and these things are basically giant billboards. And so he was very against putting his name on the side of a truck because he didn't want anyone to know it was him.
Well, if you go back to the old co-op days, you didn't want to be very visible, and you had to keep your company small. So you weren't visible, but your door signs would be very small, where people really couldn't read the name from a distance. There's regulations about how small it could get, but we basically made it as small as you possibly could to be somewhat invisible. And as we get into the Southwest Motor Freight days, after deregulation, I basically was doing a mock-up of a trailer with the big logo down the side. And my dad had always been one of these people that you got to be invisible. And he'd been in California, and he came back a day early, and I had this trailer out in front of the building for people to give me their ideas on it, because in a regulated environment, or with especially the co-op and stuff he's doing, he tried to stay invisible. But in the future, with deregulation, you had to get your name out there so people knew who you were, and that, in my opinion, was something we had to do. But he came back a day early, and he saw this trailer out there with this big logo all the way down the side of the trailer. Almost looked like a circus wagon to a certain extent. But, he went through the roof. There's no way we're going to do that. And being a son, I was always getting in trouble for something. And that was one of the somethings, and he basically got mad at me, told me to go home. He didn't fire me, told me to go home and think about what I'd done, which I thought I was doing the right thing. We're building a company, we got to build a brand, we got to build a reputation. It's full speed ahead, in my opinion. And he's basically saying, no. He
doesn't want anyone knowing that Southwest Motor Freight.
He was so used to trying to stay invisible that he didn't want it. And then my stepmom stepped in the next day and basically said, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to let you do it, but these are the guidelines. Okay. Once they gave me guidelines, I pretty well knew what I'd get by with.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's fast forward to where we're at a point where David has decided to start Covenant. The bank has this banker has decided to lend him money and you money, as you told this story.
Well, there's before you get into that, there's another part of the story that would occur before that.
Okay.
And that is, as we were looking for companies to buy, there's a company called Countrywide that my dad still owned that, I ended up making a deal with him if I could come up with the money.
How much money?
I don't remember the numbers at this point.
But it was big. It was millions of dollars.
Probably $8 or $10 million or something like that. But if I could come up with the money, he would sell the company to me. So I ended up going up to a brokerage firm called Alex Brown, which is one that really took a lot of the truckload guys public. There's a guy named Bill Egg and John Larkin. So I ended up convincing them that we can take the company public. At the same time, I end up with majority ownership, but the public really is the one that comes up with the money to pay my dad. So we almost put the deal together, and okay, so I come back and I'm working with my dad, and then the guy named Bill Thiel that bought Southwest Motor Freight from my dad just months before, he basically steps in and says, well, I'll double the price, whatever they're paying, I'll double the price. He made, my understanding, he made a $5 million deposit on that deal, and which was supposedly non-refundable, and to block us from buying it. So at that point, okay, the deal kind of caved in. So that's when we started the process to start U.S. Express after that.
So what happens to Covenant? What happens to Countrywide?
Countrywide basically was still a company there.
Okay.
The guy ultimately didn't close on the deal.
Bill Phil, who put a $5 million non-refundable deposit down, did he actually fund the deposit?
That's my understanding.
Okay, so he put $5 million in, and it doesn't close. Why doesn't it close?
I don't think he has the money to be able to close.
Oh, he only had $5 million.
I don't know the details on his side.
So, but he put $5 million in an account.
He basically were blocking us because he knew that we'd be a very strong competitor in that market.
Okay, but he put some money in. It doesn't close. What happens to Countrywide?
Okay, Countrywide basically continues to operate, and then about
Was Clyde involved in Countrywide?
yeah.
And he was allowed, when he sold Southwest Motor Freight,
He
was allowed to work in Countrywide.
Right. That's the only thing he could do was he could continue with Countrywide. And Ken Adams was running the company, but my dad was still the owner. So
Was he involved at all?
Yeah. He'd spent a lot of time in California, which he loved California, so that gave him a good excuse to get out there, and it was close to Vegas too. So he'd usually make a trip or two over to Vegas while he was out there, but ended up buying a house in Palm Springs in the process. But Countrywide continued to operate, and about a year later, he decides, who's the guys that you called to go public? And I gave him the guys' names. So next thing I know, Countrywide's going public. And using a lot of the same theory that I'd put together for him. But, pretty interesting to watch how the story unfolded. So Countrywide ended up going public, and then...
Do you remember the market cap or anything like that?
No, I don't.
But it was not a small number.
No, it was a small number. It was a pretty sizable company at that point. Several, probably 800-900 owner-operators maybe.
So those days might have been a $100 million business?
I doubt if it was that big, because Southwest, when it was sold in '84, was only $65 million, and we had probably 1,000 trucks. So
$60 million business.
Right. So Countrywide ended up getting public, and then later the railroads were all talking about being able to utilize, their freight with trucking companies. So a company called CSX Railroad comes in and buys control from my dad, and they continue to operate Countrywide going forward with Ken Adams, and the company basically continued to grow, but and this may be jumping out of our timeline a little bit, but 4 or 5 years later, I don't remember the timeline for sure, then the company started having cash flow problems at the bank.
Because the railroad wasn't, this is when CSX was
Railroads basically have a different theory on how freight moves, and they don't understand the service intensity of trucking. They do today with intermodal, but they didn't back then. And there was another railroad that bought North American Van Lines, kind of similar story. Great American Van Lines. American Van Lines is very aggressive in the marketplace.
Yeah, North American was one of the biggest players, right?
They were a big player, and they were good at what they did. But when they sold out to the railroads over a period of years, they just kind of disappeared.
Yeah, railroads that don't have a good track record on truck companies.
Right. It's we're moving freight, but trucking is a lot more service intensive than what the railroad is. The railroad will get it there when they get it there.
Yeah, and they just kind of print money.
They do
because they own the tracks and stuff. They had their own issues in the '80s, sort of post de-trucking regulation, Motor Carrier Act. The whole the deregulation. Railroads also went through a period of deregulation at the same time. In 1980, and that allowed them to merge, but it also created a lot of sort of short-term issues as they were trying to figure it out. It's kind of a mess in the 80s. Buying trucking was a way for them to sort of hedge, but didn't have a great track record of doing that.
No, they didn't.
And so Countrywide is on its thing. It's now sort of outside the family. Southwest Motor Freight has been sold. Bill Phil, who was Penske's CFO, has come in and bought it. Is embezzling money. Somehow he gets caught up in a Ponzi scheme.
Well, he gets moving a lot of money into his accounts in New Jersey, and the banker basically starts putting pressure on him. This is after Pat, David, and I had left. Started putting pressure on him to, keep a good balance in his account. And he also was self-insured. And my understanding, I don't remember all the details, but my understanding is that Bill Thiel ultimately went to prison because of insurance fraud.
Okay, it wasn't a Ponzi scheme.
They weren't paying. He had all kinds of schemes, but that's the one they prosecuted him on. But Southwest Motor Freight ended up filing bankruptcy, and I can't remember the exact date, maybe 1988, 89, somewhere through there, 4 or 5 years after my dad sold it.
So U.S. Express and Covenant started in 1985.
Right.
You guys had started a leasing company that was leasing onto Southwest Motor Freight, and you started pulling and Countrywide, and you pulled those trucks out. Okay,
it's kind of the perfect deal. David had to pull off his 25 trucks all at one time.
Why?
Because it was with Bill Thiel.
Oh, it was with Southwest Motor Freight.
Okay, so
and then in Countrywide.
So Pat and I had the 48 trucks, which had started as 50, but 48 trucks.
2 of them had an accident.
Right, at Countrywide. And so as we started building our business, we were able to pull trucks, when we needed additional trucks. So, if we'd started out with 48 trucks, and, that expense would have been probably enough to where we probably couldn't have pulled it off. But the fact that we could pull trucks as we needed them, and we had freight for them, it's kind of the perfect deal. And that really gave us a good shot in the arm. We did a pro forma for the banks, a 5-year pro forma that basically said it'd take 4 years before it would be profitable. But in 1985, early 86, oil prices took a real big dip. At that point, it was the biggest dip in history. And so we became profitable in the first 9 months.
Oil started trading at like $9, I think it got down to $9 a barrel or something, WTI.
I don't remember it being that cheap, but it was really cheap.
It was, at one point, it got really, really cheap.
Yeah.
Because all of the oil, the S&L crisis hit in the late 80s or mid 80s. A lot of these banks in Texas started going bust.
Right.
And that was it was basically cheap oil prices that caused a financial crisis because Texas was so levered.
Yeah.
And a lot of the banks, the S&L crisis took right. A lot of those guys down. So you're out starting what became one of the most successful businesses in trucking. David Parker's got his business that's in trucking. Clyde has got Countrywide, is now in the process of taking it public. We're the mid 80s. What is going on in your life and Clyde's life and your relationship with Clyde? What is that like?
Well, it's probably pretty good at that point.
You guys were pretty friendly at this point.
We're friendly at that point. We also had created, when I bought, I'm jumping ahead, probably shouldn't go
ahead.
When Southwest went broke, my dad went back in to the bankruptcy court, ended up buying the assets and the trade names and authorities and stuff from Southwest for $1.
The bank basically called him in and said, "Hey, this business is going under. It's bankrupt."
Well, the court basically decreed it.
The bankruptcy court
is over $20 million upside down, and they don't know for sure because they quit doing accounting almost a year before it went under.
Okay, so
it just didn't keep track of anything.
The business is a mess. The bankruptcy court says, "Hey, we are willing to, if someone would take on the debts."
He took on the debts. He also
did he get the banks to restructure the debts?
He didn't get it all restructured, just some of it.
Okay,
and that ended up being part of the problem later on because he's still strapped with some of the high interest stuff that he was having to pay off, and what I would call poor deals that were done when he wasn't involved.
So he inherited a mess.
So
I remember watching TV because in these days the local news we only had 3 channels.
Yeah.
And I remember watching it, and I remember them interviewing Clyde. He's behind his desk, and he's talking to the reporter, and he pulls out $1, and they're like, "What'd you pay for this business?" And he was very proud of the fact that he paid $1 for the business, and they essentially gave him the keys because Southwest Motor Freight, I mean, checks were bouncing, payroll checks were bouncing. It was a mess right before that.
Well, it was a total mess. And like I said, they quit even doing accounting almost a full year before that. The bankruptcy court hired a bunch of accountants to go and try to figure out how bad the company was. And they finally said, this thing is so bad, and they didn't keep enough records to know what was going on, where they basically kind of canned the whole deal and said, it's just so far under, we're bankrupting the company. And then ultimately, Bill Thiel ends up going to prison, on what I understand was insurance fraud.
Okay. I thought he had ran a pot. So Bill Thiel's in prison.
Well, he had all kinds of schemes.
Now, Bill Thiel is now in prison. Did you testify against Bill Thiel?
I did not testify against him, no.
So it was just the feds came in and said he's in trouble?
Well, since I was with the company the last 4 or 5 years.
I see.
I was distant enough from it where, I didn't know what he did.
You just didn't have current knowledge.
The only thing I did that would adversely affect the guy was when Pat David and I left the company, the banker called us and asked us what was going on. And since I'd spent the weekend going through and trying to figure out where all the money was going, I basically told him where it was going. So that's the only thing I said, anything negative about the company. And I had a lot of friends and people that worked at the company, so I didn't want to do anything to hurt the company. So I didn't.
Okay, so Bill Thiel is going to prison. Clyde is now taking over Southwest Motor Freight. You're running a fast-growing business. This is a time when I was sort of aware of what was happening. You had started this business in a trailer in North Georgia. Dalton, Georgia, double wide. And it was kind of, as a 7, 8-year-old boy, we could go down there and hang out in the trucks. I just remember that. And it was relatively happy. There were some stressful moments. You guys outgrew your cash flow at one point. You were going so fast.
We did.
I remember there was a weekend, and you were very stressed, but I didn't know it at the time. But hindsight, because I just remember how stressed everything was. We went to a soccer tournament, and I think you guys were having serious cash flow issues simply because
we're growing too fast.
Yeah,
I mean, we're growing about 80% a year.
Yeah,
and that was in 1989 when that occurred.
Okay.
But
I would have been 10 years old.
But there's more to that story that we'll get into in a little while.
What is that story?
Well, okay, this is jumping ahead, but in 1989. I was struggling because the company was growing so fast, I had to come up with cash. So I figured out how to do it, and I'm not going to tell you how I did it. But it's still legal, but I ended up with enough cash where that gave me the money that when my dad wanted to shut down Southwest Motor Freight, I could go buy the company from him. It also gave me the cash to grow at a very, very fast pace.
So you took a loan shark out?
Well, it's similar, but it's still legal.
Okay. All right. Well, so you go borrow money from Guido. Guido's giving you some cash. You got the cash to fund your business.
Right. I mean,
and then
it was almost like today's PE firms.
I see. So you've taken out a high levered note. You probably, as you described, not proud of it. You've borrowed all this money, and you've now have the capital to go buy Southwest Motor Freight, right? Because Clyde is taking back over, and he gets overwhelmed, right?
He took over the thing and basically, was 2 to 3 years into it, and he'd come down to Yes Express and look at what we did. How many mechanics per trucks do you have? And he decides he's overstaffed. Okay, and part of the overstaff was kind of a takeover from the previous company where they didn't have to worry about expenses, because
they didn't have to make a profit.
They were that far upside down.
Yeah.
So he'd come down, he'd look at headcount, he'd look at all kinds of things we were doing, he'd go back and try to implement it at Southwest. And when I figured out what he was doing, I said, it won't work. And he wanted to know why. And I'll give you the reason here in a minute, but he basically was trying to replicate US Express because we're running operating ratio in the mid-80s. We're growing almost 80% a year. I mean, things were really good other than having to struggle on cash flow, and I didn't care what I paid for the money because I knew I could grow out of it. Yeah, and that's the reason I borrowed it the way I borrowed it. But it all worked. It worked very well. And then when he basically was in the process of trying to turn Southwest around, couldn't do it. He tried to do things the way they did it in the old days, and he had been out of the business almost for 8 or 9 years at that point. Even though he was an owner a little bit before that, he's really out of the business. Didn't understand the changes that went on under deregulation. And so but he's still trying to run it like he did in the regulated days. It wouldn't work the same way. So the company was running 100 plus operating ratio. He finally decides that he's going to shut the business down. So, he calls and tells me what he's getting ready to do. And I said, don't do it. And he wanted to know why. And I said, it's easy to fix. He said, it's not easy to fix. I spent 3 years trying to fix this thing.
1992, right?
No, this is 1991. Yeah, maybe you're right. 91, 92.
Because you guys bought Southwest in 92.
Right. Okay, but he made that announcement. He's getting ready to go to California, and I said...
he made an announcement publicly that he shut it down?
No, he made an announcement to the family he was going to shut it down.
Okay.
And I kept telling him, don't do it. And he said, why? And I said, that thing's fixable. And he said, well, I've been trying to fix it. And I said, the problem is the way you're trying to fix it is all wrong. And so in the process, he says, well, if you think you can fix it, how about you buying the company? Well, I basically decided to buy the company.
You have all this cash left over from your loan from Guido, and you come in and you buy this business. Is $100 million revenue business at this point?
Well, it's about $65 million, which was a lot of money back then.
And what, you said 1,000 trucks?
Probably 1,500 trucks or so, maybe at that point.
Okay, much bigger. And U.S. Express was how big at this? It was smaller, right?
We're about 60% the size of
and you're going to
Southwest.
You're going to swallow the whale.
Now I'm going to swallow a whale that had been in bankruptcy before and hadn't performed very well.
It's a mess of a business. But the nice thing is you at least knew the business because you ran it.
I knew the business. I knew the people. It was one of those challenges. I've always kind of kept a sideline business, even like. I had 2 or 3 different businesses I had on side always. Mm-hmm. So I thought, well, this would be another one of the sideline businesses. So I jumped in. So we bought the thing. All my lenders at U.S. Express disappeared.
They all thought you were nuts.
They thought I was crazy because I'm swallowing this big company, been in bankruptcy, and it's a lot bigger than what I am. And 9 months into it, I kind of agreed with them.
So there was a moment where you were panicked.
Well, I basically kept trying to fix the thing, and would go into meetings, and people would say, yeah, they'll do it. Come to the meeting next week, it wasn't done.
Same thing.
So they didn't know any difference. And when you explained what you want them to do, they still didn't get it. So we had a lot of Black Fridays. And I basically assigned people to certain jobs, and if they didn't do the job, they were gone.
They had to terminate them.
Yeah, and it got down to the point, everybody in management that had been in the company before was gone, except for one person.
And because they couldn't make the transition.
They couldn't think outside the box in order to think differently.
They were not buying into what you were trying to accomplish, or couldn't.
They were so ingrained to what they had been doing.
Mm-hmm.
That they couldn't think of it any other way.
Gotcha. Okay, so you guys take over this business. There's a point where it's struggling. Southwest Motor Freight's struggling, but you eventually get it turned around.
Well, we're 9 months in, and I'm looking at myself saying, "Why did I do this? I had it made at U.S. Express. Truthfully, everything was going so great at U.S. Express, and I take over this dog that I'm having to turn around.
There's a freight recession going on about this.
And freight recession that's occurring.
Would have been Gulf War I.
We had 91.
Desert Storm.
Yeah.
Had just hit maybe 6 months before. Oil prices are really high.
Right.
We've gone the opposite direction of when you started the business. And the economy has slowed down due to the uncertainty around this Gulf War situation.
Right. Well, there's even more to that story, and that's if as the companies basically started into the 53-foot trailer deal, the laws basically were changing. And
gone from 48 to 53?
And Covenant, and yes, going from 48 to 53. Covenant basically, and Southwest had all started buying cab over tractors, which they'd used conventionals before, thinking that they had to have cab overs in order to pull the 53-foot trailers. And the problem in that law was, in the previous law, they looked at overall length of tractor and trailer combined. But in the new law, they only looked at the length of the trailer. So they had gone out and bought a bunch of cab over tractors, which in my opinion are not as safe, and they didn't operate nearly as efficiently, and they were less driver friendly. And I was all conventional at that point, and they kept saying you're not going to be able to pull 53s. Well, being kind of the typical person, prove it to me. I basically went out and leased a bunch of 53-foot trailers and started pulling them with conventional tractors. And I basically told my drivers, I said, if you have a problem, here's the federal law, what it says, and if they have a problem, you call me. Here's my number, call me day or night. And I had hundreds of calls. But once the officers read what the law said, they basically agreed. So we were the first people to really put conventional tractors with 53-foot trailers out there. The problem is when I acquired Southwest, they had all these cab over tractors, which I didn't like, didn't operate nearly as efficiently, not as driver friendly. And the Gulf War basically happened, and guess what? They needed a bunch of trucks.
The government, the military.
The military needed a bunch of trucks to ship into the theater in the Gulf War. So I sold a lot of those cab over tractors to the government, got me out of the cab over tractors, got me over into the conventionals, which was a lot more driver friendly, and I think it's safer. And that basically solved a big problem for me, because before the war, I couldn't get the price out of those trucks that I got.
So you were able to de-lever the Southwest balance.
I was able to de-lever because of the war.
Because they were rebuilding Kuwait, and
Right.
This opened up an export market for these cab overs.
Right.
You were able to get rid of the old trucks, bring in new trucks to replace them with the red trucks, the conventional trucks. And now Southwest and U.S. Press are one company. You've basically bought this business.
Well, I really kept Southwest separate for about the first 4 or 5 years in order to kind of detox it.
Okay, because you need to change culture.
Because the culture had to be changed. I had to get the thing profitable. If I merged it, I probably couldn't have seen some of the problems. So I kind of kept it to itself, and occasionally we'd swap freight, which basically was okay because we both had General Commodities Authority at that point. I
was actually working in dispatch in those days, and, when you guys had two separate companies,
right,
and two separate same AS400, at least by the time I got there. But you had to go between companies, and if you had to move freight or a truck from one company to the other, you had to do an intercompany swap. It was sort of fun. Thank you for tuning in to Fuller Speed Ahead. Check back soon for part 6 of our interview with Max Fuller and the history of our family in the trucking industry. Stay tuned.